Yeah, thank you very much. I have way too many slides, so I'm just going to horse through them. Just to say, when I was thinking about how to approach this, I thought I would sort of run with decarbonising transport and how that's going to benefit air quality, but I do recognise that that lens is not always ideal. And in the past, sort of efforts to decarbonise and to reduce carbon emissions had unintended consequences on air quality, particularly the dieselification of the fleet, and we're still seeing a lot of those sort of 2007, 2008 diesel cars circulating, and of course has consequences in terms of they're less efficient, and the tailpipe emissions are not good from the point of view of NOx. But I suppose the department is working very closely with DEC and with stakeholders through the UTRAP group to ensure that our policies, such as our direction on decarbonisation, doesn't have those unintended consequences for air quality. And I guess in terms of concern to air quality in transport is, in a major way, I suppose, is the contribution to NOx, with transport accounting for about 35% of nitrogen oxide emissions in Ireland. So just to bear that in mind. So we have to cut our emissions by 50%. That's no surprise to anyone. It's aligned with the Clean Air Strategy. We have quite a bit to do. We have to reduce total distance driven across all car journeys by 20%. We have to ensure that our public transport services are accessible. We are investing in the region of 11 billion in new transport infrastructure between now and 2030, and there's huge amount of investment in walking, cycling and public transport, and we are targeting those to account for 50% of our journeys by 2030. Our approach to decarbonisation is, I suppose, simple, in that it has this paradigm of avoid, shift and improve. So these naturally overlap and they are mutually reinforcing. We need to do all of this. So in terms of avoid, you're talking about integrated land use planning, remote working, digitalisation and a whole range of other measures. In shift, it's really trying to encourage people to use more sustainable travel means, and then improve is really around improving the energy efficiency of the vehicle technology, like EVs, etc. So in terms of understanding the ambition, I think this is a useful image here. If you look at the yellow line across the graph on the right-hand side, that's where we're trying to get to. So with business as usual and with all that planned investment, we're still going to see our emissions going upwards. The planned investment in public transport, walking and cycling infrastructure. But, with our targets around electrification of the fleet, combined with biofuels, we find ourselves maybe 75% of the way there towards that target. But we still have a gap to target, and that's where demand management comes in. And demand management is really about trying to accelerate that shift to sustainable transport modes. These are our key kind of policy documents. So in the avoid, we're developing a demand management strategy called Moving Together. In the shift, we already have a policy in place and an action plan. We have an EV charging infrastructure strategy in place, and finally the renewable transport fuel policy. In terms of renewable fuels, it's not clear, the data isn't very clear in terms of the implications of biofuels on air quality, and it's complicated somewhat by, the fuel mix, the driving conditions, the source of the fuels, the vehicle technologies, etc. But that's an area that probably needs to be monitored. So just quickly on avoid, really, this is, the case for change. We're talking about systems change and moving away from the very car-dependent model that we have. And there's, scope for a lot more car ownership and usage and dependency in Ireland. Our population is projected to grow by 6 million by 2040. But an inefficient network, and I suppose that's what, when we think about avoid, we're talking about managing travel demand, and we're trying to, bring efficiency into the existing system rather than building capacity. Because an inefficient network, which we have in many respects now in certain areas at certain times, it leads to so many costs. So there's congestion costs, which are, projected to be an eye-watering 2 billion nationally by 2040. We're going to have huge non-compliance costs in terms of our climate targets. We've competitiveness costs. We're not going to be able to attract foreign direct investment if if you can't get about our cities. The opportunity cost is huge as well. We're investing massively in public transport, in walking and cycling infrastructure, but if buses can't get through traffic, it's not going to be efficient. If people still feel that they're walking and cycling in unsafe and unhealthy environments, they're not going to do it. And then there's all these social and environmental factors, including, of course, air and noise pollution and the health implications of that. So, I mean, there is a system change needed. It's not just about reaching our climate targets, it's for a whole host of other reasons, but we won't reach those climate targets without the system change. And that's why there's this commitment to develop a demand management strategy. So what does the strategy hope to achieve? When we set out, it emanates from the Climate Action Plan 2023. It was a commitment there in the programme for government. But when we started to look at it, we did realise that actually it's not really just about climate and carbon reduction. Is actually a co-benefit of all the other reasons why we need to make this change. So I'll just touch on the first one there, and we felt that this was really important. It was to support the health, safety and well-being of people and to minimise the social and environmental costs of transport and car dependency, including those related to congestion, air and noise pollution. So in terms of the types of things that we considered when we were developing the strategy, we looked at, of course, how the integrated land use and transport planning can have a huge effect. If you have people living and working, close together, if all the services are easily accessible, then you have less journeys to make. Your journeys are shorter and they can be less polluting. We looked at fiscal measures in terms of, how can you nudge the taxation system that we have to be maybe more fair, more equitable, embed the user and polluter pays principle more readily, and to future-proof it, I suppose, as well. But a key focus for the development of the strategy was on generators of demand. So generators of demand, people, and what we included in there was everything, really. It was, work, commuting, tourism, sport, public sector, schools, all the reasons why people travel, why they need to travel, it's really important, and what are the interventions and who do we need to get on board to make change happen. Equally, we did the same on the freight side, and that's both in terms of, the long distance freight, but also within an urban environment in terms of urban logistics and curbside management, etc. We looked at optimal use of space, and I think this is really critical as well. The strategy was took an urban first approach, and I think that's really important from the perspective of air quality and the use of our space, because in some of our towns about 80% of space is taken up by cars, just through our street space and parking, etc. And that's happened over time, and it's happened for good reason. Cars are great, and we all need them, but I suppose we did kind of give up an awful lot of space, and we can't keep continuing to allow it to occupy space at the disadvantage of accessibility, inclusivity, air quality, and just a more attractive and pleasant and safe urban environment for people to move around in. And then finally, we took account of captive car users, and what we mean by that are people. There are so many people who are locked into car dependency, and there is, and through no fault of their own, it's due to personal circumstances, where you live, the type of work that you do. Obviously, in rural areas, you're more limited. You don't have alternatives available. You can't make a change if there's no feasible alternatives. That has to be recognised, and it has to be recognised as well in terms of there needs to be a just transition piece around this. It can't be unrealistic. And I think we always think of captive car users as those that are, outside of urban environments, but lots of us live in city areas where we want to get from A to B, and the alternatives are not sufficient to get us there in time for what we need. So it has to be pragmatic, and it's really about, and I think it was kind of mentioned earlier as well, it's about targeting people who maybe can change, where those alternatives are there, and maybe they just need a little nudge, and get those people moving first, and then we'll try and work on creating alternatives for the others. So these were some of the key recommendations that came out of the strategy. Major focus on empowering local authorities, because local authorities are going to be at the front line of this system change. And, certainly from the transport point of view, it's no longer just simply about, roads development and traffic management. We're talking about shared mobility, about electric vehicle charging, and also road space reallocation. Behavioural change is a big thing, and it would be very difficult to expect engineers to be behavioural scientists as well. There's a huge amount of effort and resource needs to go into this, and capacity building as well. And a huge amount of engagement is needed across all sectors of the economy, all sectors of society, and the recommendation tried to reflect that everybody needs to make a contribution in one way or another to create this kind of system change. Now, I had hoped to be here going, yay, it's approved. But unfortunately, it hasn't been approved at this particular time. But I acknowledge that this is supposed to be an optimistic session, and I do feel that so much of what was in the draft strategy will be carried through in one way or another, because it has to be done for lots and lots of reasons. In terms of the shift piece then, this is all the supports that are being put in place through the Sustainable Mobility Policy to provide really good alternatives for people. The targets are 50% increase in daily active travel journeys by 2030, including a 130% increase in daily public transport. Huge focus on delivery. We have a task force driving implementation, annual progress report each August, one just recently. And if you're interested in this, there's all of the advances that we've made and the achievements that we've made are included in that. Just there in terms of, we have a kind of about a delivery rate of about 70% at this stage. Some really good initiatives, young adult travel card, enhanced public transport services, e-scooters legal on Irish roads. I don't know if everybody feels happy about that. Then I think just very important to note this massive improvements and progress on Connecting Ireland and Rural Link. 280,000 people now have access to new and enhanced services. 78% increase on passenger number growth in these services year on year, with 3.2 million journeys. We're spending nearly 300 million each year on improving walking, cycling projects, and over 1 billion has been invested in the last few years. So you'll see that change everywhere. Pathfinder program through, which is really all about spotlighting what we're doing, demonstrating, sharing learnings, showing people what is possible and trying to get that buy-in. And just to mention transport-oriented development as well, which is really critical and goes across both the avoid and shift areas. And there's lots of work underway there between our department and the Department of Housing. So I'm running out of time, but I'm going to go through these really quickly. So EV uptake, and obviously the transition to EVs is really important from the point of view of air quality. There are currently over 140,000 EVs on Irish roads now, so it makes up 5% of the vehicle fleet. And while there has been a little bit of a slowing down in uptake, that's just, it's not exclusive to Ireland, it's mirrored elsewhere, and there is an expectation that that'll kind of bounce back. So there is really strong, encouraging signs there. And a total of 32,000 new electric vehicles were registered between September last year and this. And there's also quite a bit of uptake on commercial van uptake as well. In terms of, there's a whole range of incentives to support EV uptake, and I think that's really, really important. And you see there one very significant one is around the taxi grant scheme. So, I mean, taxi drivers who switch to a WAV, wheelchair accessible vehicle, fueled electrically, can get up to 25,000. Equally, the HDV grant scheme is quite generous, albeit it can't cover the full cost differential. There. EV infrastructure as well, a huge amount of infrastructure coming on stream. You see that there's over 2,400 installed, up from 1,700 in September 2022, and that will continue. There's also a whole range of new charging infrastructure schemes in development. I can't go through them all there, but they are touching on, having those chargers at along motorways, along our secondary roads, in community areas like our sports club scheme, and as part of Just Transition there across the Midlands. Bus electrification as well, really really important work going on there. We have committed to having a zero emission urban bus fleet by 2035, and we're on target for that. Our Athlone, of course, was the first all electric town service. And then Bus Connects is also supporting that electrification, and it was great to see, and was mentioned earlier, the 34 double-deck electric buses which entered service in Limerick there earlier this year. So all of this is going to really make a difference in terms of rollout of services, but also rollout of clean buses. In terms of the rail network then, there is a tripling of the electrified network through the DART Plus programme, and also there is the first order of the DART fleet. Battery electric and electric carriages are now coming on stream. So there was 65 battery electric and 30 electric charges ordered in 2021. So they've sort of been arrived, they're testing now, and they're expected to enter into service in 2026. So that's really positive. We have Metrolink as well, of course. And look, it might seem, it's not actually a far away plan for construction later this decade and operation around the early 2030s, so that would be really positive. I didn't touch on, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, but I should mention that, through that directive, Ireland is going to have to provide hydrogen refueling stations along the 10T network and at our 5 cities. And there's also been assessments done around shoreside electricity as well for ships, and a good deal of work going on there around trying to reduce the impact, I suppose, of vessels at port in terms of air pollution, and particularly where they are close to urban settlements. So sorry about going over time, and sorry for just throwing loads of information at you. Thank you very much.